And that can't be ignored or poo-pooed or left out of the picture. But it isn't just about the money. Think about it for a moment. We've had, in recent years, 3 genetically engineered intentional pandemics. We've had SARS, we've had avian flu, and we've had H1N1 flu. And each one of them has been like a soggy firecracker. Lots of sizzle and no pop. That shows, of course, how very hard it is to kill large numbers of people. People have this inconvenient thing, if you're a genocidalist, of course it's inconvenient, called resiliency and resistance, especially if they are even marginally well-nourished. The wonder is that there are so many people who are still surviving under the onslaught of this endless attempt to depopulate us. But it's being done through multiple systems. Yes, the created diseases, the so-called pandemics, and of course we know that it was not a pandemic at all. This was a complete hoax. But it was a hoax that the World Health Organization and the U.S. CDC and FDA and so on were perfectly willing to perpetrate. And we're not done with that hoax, by the way. They will be back with this one because there are billions upon billions of dollars worth of vaccines that they have to get rid of, which is why, in the absence of any significant disease, except for total lies for statistics, and we can talk about that if you like, they now say, the CDC, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, which makes recommendations and states make them mandatory, they now say that the H1N1 vaccine will be put into next season.
Okay, Dr. Label, we're about ready to go to break. Let's pick it up right there when we get back.
You might not know this yet, but there is a difference between the men that talk about it and the men that have done it. The world is thick with problems and terrible news. Anybody can tell us those things, but who has the solutions? Whom among us has crawled the gauntlet and come out strong and free on the other side? One has. His name is Big John Lipscomb, and he's the real deal. He doesn't wait for others to fix the problems. He makes his own life on his own terms. A throwback to the times when men walked the earth boldly. It seems to be a rare thing today. You might learn something if you dare to tune into his radio show. It's called Don't Tread on Me. To learn more, go to don'ttreadonme.tv. But beware, he's a little rough around the edges.
Welcome back to Don't Tread on Me radio show. My name is Jeffrey Grupp with Big John Lipscomb. We're talking to Dr. Rima Labo today about Codex Alimentarius, one of the more haunting things about the New World Order's plan that they think they're going to pull on all of us. Dr. Labo, tell us about some of the numbers involved in the estimated extermination that you've discussed might be in order according to their plans.
Well, let's start with HIV, and let's start with and let's include the relationship between HIV and genetically modified food. Most folks don't know about this, and it's of enormous importance. We know, many people know, that for quite a while there's been a lot of evidence, very compelling evidence, that the so-called HIV virus is no such thing. And people have been very interested in looking at what in the world could be causing the cataclysmic decline in the CD4 cells of the immune system of somebody who's afflicted with this disease and who receives a diagnosis of HIV and then subsequently AIDS. Turns out that when you genetically modify a crop, you generally introduce something called the cauliflower mosaic virus, or CMV for short, in order to irritate the DNA and make it, in essence, move aside to allow the new DNA in to the nucleus, because it really has no place there. And so the cauliflower mosaic virus is introduced, and then it replicates in the cells of the genetically modified food. Well, if I were to feed you, and I wouldn't do this because I respect what you're doing and I'm not a genocidalist, but if I were to feed you the cauliflower mosaic virus just by itself as a contaminant in something or other, your CD4 cells would very likely start to decline. And they would decline to the point where, when the clinical diagnosis was made, the diagnosis would be HIV. And then, with continued replication and continued destruction of your immune system, the diagnosis would be changed to AIDS, and you would be developing all the symptoms of somebody with HIV and AIDS. You would probably be put on antiretroviral drugs if you didn't have control of your life or adequate information, and they would hasten your demise while pouring additional money into the coffers of these folks. That means that, for instance, in Africa, where Monsanto, South Africa specifically, where Monsanto's white corn, MON 810 and TZ25, were illegally introduced and became the dominant corn in South Africa. And remember, white corn is the staple of the diet in South Africa. South Africa, which has the highest HIV rates in the world, for instance, in KwaZulu-Natal province, South Africans are dying, and they're dying of genetically modified corn. If that isn't a ghastly depopulation scheme, I don't know what is, combining food and evil. Now, the Obama administration, as you know, has appointed the former governor of Idaho, who is a Monsanto executive, as Secretary of Agriculture. He's a Monsanto man. Michael Taylor, an attorney for Monsanto, is a food safety czar. God help us one and all. The entire food system is littered with the Monsanto and Syngenta and Bayer Crop Science and other biotech apparatchiks. Why? Yes, money, of course. But even more importantly, Monsanto said about 20 years ago that by 2010 they would own the world's food supply. And with the help of the genocidal globalists, they're doing an awfully good job of getting ahead in their plan. Now, there is no safety testing associated with the marketing of any genetically modified food in the United States. In fact, the FDA is forbidden from examining safety tests or calling for its own safety tests after a very preliminary report is issued by the company that says, yep, our stuff is safe, yep, you don't have to look at the data, but it's safe, and the FDA says, right, then your stuff is approved. This is insane, but this is the way it's done. That's one of the genocidal and financial grab techniques, but it's not the only one. Vaccines are another one, and many of the vaccines and drugs that are being used right now, and remember, about 50% of all the drugs that are approved